I am Kevin Hoare, and we are recording this on the 15th because we got a special guest here that's going to give us some very good insight. He's actually become a regular guest for us in so many ways because there's so many things that he can share with us, not only in the state legislature, but now we're going to learn something today about ranked choice voting, and it's an extremely important topic. With us. Joining us today is State Representative Ed Diehl. Is it House District 17? It's a tiny little print on my end, so I'm not sure.
You got it. HD 17. Good to be with you again, Kevin.
It's great to have you on. And I know I got to see some of this in Lane County on Saturday. And so I think we got a lot of important stuff here to share. Now, let's see if this sharing works. Otherwise, I'm ready with the other backup plan. So
okay.
Are you able to share it now?
Yeah, let's give it a go here. If this doesn't work, we'll let's see, where's the screen?
And this is a PowerPoint, folks. So what it'll do is it may show big on your screen and then show the two of us like in little screens next to it is how it usually works.
Okay. Now let's share the screen, share a window.
Let's see, show on stream. It's giving me that same thing that we did when we were testing it, so I can't see it. So let me try sharing.
Go ahead and do it. Yeah.
I'll share it from my end, and then you just tell me, hey, advance.
Next.
So, well, first let me do the screen slideshow share. All right. And then a window. And there it is.
Hey, wow. Okay. That's great.
So, yeah, this is really kind of cool because what you're going to be able to see, you're going to hear Representative Diehl explaining this and us talking about it, but you're going to be able to see this information that's actually really critical that everyone learn about. Now, we know that ranked choice voting is going to be on the statewide ballot this fall. Is that correct?
That is correct. Statewide ballot. It was passed by the legislature to refer to the voters.
And it was really on a party line basis, right? I mean, it was Democrats really want it. And they actually, this group that was pushing this forward was interested in gathering signatures, but they got the state legislature to go ahead and refer it for them, which saved them hundreds of thousands of dollars at least, didn't it?
You're right. Yeah, there's a big out-of-state push to bring this to Oregon. And what happened is our Speaker Rayfield, who's now running for Attorney General, he's a huge advocate for ranked choice voting. So I know he encouraged all the Democrats in the legislature to support it. All the House Democrats did. One Senate Democrat did not. But I've done a pretty deep dive into this, and it's got some real problems. I don't think it's the right solution for Oregon, much less any other state. And it's not a partisan issue either, Kevin. I know it was a partisan vote in Oregon, but there are Democrats that don't like this, that are strongly opposed to it in different parts of the country. There's also Republicans, there's independents. There's a lot of compelling reasons not to implement this, and that's what this slide deck goes through.
Well, and then the name of it, and I know we'll probably come back to this too, the ballot title is going to be Gives Voters Option to Rank Candidates in Order of Preference. Candidate receiving majority of votes wins. We've had a problem here in this state with ballot titles that don't exactly shed very much light on what people are voting, and sometimes actually deceive them outright. And an attorney general, which at this point, I mean, she's been in the tank for I don't know how long, that she will not act in the way that she could to make sure that can understand what they're voting on. And we learned from Measure 113 that maybe it doesn't even matter what they're voting on, because then they'll just They'll just turn around and say, well, whatever we think you thought you were voting on, that is what you voted on. And so therefore that's the law in the state.
Well, yeah, that title sure makes it sound simple. But the title, when it says a majority, that is really misleading.
Yeah.
We'll get into that more as we go through the slides here.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and head right into it. So on this first slide, you kind of show some basic info, right? I mean,
this is just the title slide, but there's 2 websites there that I encourage people to look at. They have great information, a lot of research. They look at how it's been implemented in different states. It's good to know that I think it's 85 different jurisdictions have repealed ranked choice voting. This isn't a new idea in the United States, but 85 jurisdictions have repealed it.
Wow. And some of those jurisdictions are not exactly right-wing strongholds, right?
No. Washington, D.C., the Democrats in Washington, D.C., the District of Washington, D.C., are adamantly opposed to ranked choice voting. The NAACP in Oakland is contesting an election that was done with ranked choice voting.
Wow.
So this isn't a partisan issue. This is issues with the way ranked choice voting is structured, and there's just serious flaws with it. So.
Yeah, and I was at Dorchester a few years ago, and they tried to hold the vote as to your preference, I think, of a gubernatorial candidate.
Yeah.
And it didn't exactly work out because it took forever to figure out who it was. And then when people were it was explained to them how it was that their vote resulted in the end result that they saw. No one understood it. That sounds familiar. Well, why don't we launch into this?
Yeah.
And so the Ranked Choice Education Association and Stop RCV are 2 organizations that you've made reference here to. They don't have a presence in this state, right? They're national ones.
Those are national organizations. Ranked Choice Education Association, I just spoke to the gentleman that's behind that. I spoke to him twice today. And I've met the folks from Stop RCV. And they both have resources that they're making available across the country to help push back against this.
That's good. So we do have a national sort of center of excellence that we can go to.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's go to the next slide.
The next one here.
Yeah. Here we go.
So I wanted to first off talk, before we describe what ranked choice voting is, just talk about our own system that we have in Oregon, because it's so simple. We have a plurality voting system. You have one person, one vote. You pick one candidate, and the candidate with the most votes wins. Every county tallies up their votes, and then they send those to the state to roll that up into a statewide tally. It's not perfect, but it's very easy to understand. Go ahead to the next slide. And the way I look at it, it's very easy to vote. I just explained how you vote. Pick your candidate, mark the box. It's very easy to count. And relative to ranked choice voting, it's easy to trust. I know people have issues with it, but it's really not with how you fill out your ballot. So,
it's usually all the other things, like, maybe the function of the machines people have questions about. They also have questions about the voter rolls themselves and people who receive them and how those ballots are collected and even who they're sent to. But those things aside, just the actual voting method itself is pretty straightforward.
Right. So let's take a look at ranked choice voting and how that works. But first, so House Bill 2004 in 2023 put ranked choice voting with instant runoff. In the United States, we just call it ranked choice voting. But when somebody says ranked choice voting, what they're talking about is ranked choice voting, the method of voting with this instant runoff process, and we'll describe it. So the legislature voted on that. It'll be on the 2024 ballot. It's been referred. what it would do is would take the following statewide elections for primary and general. We'll use ranked choice voting. So president, U.S. Senator, U.S. Congress, the governor, Secretary of State, Treasurer, and Attorney General. Other elections will follow the current process.
So state representative and state senator?
State representative, state senator, sheriffs, commissioners, all that would follow the current plurality method process.
That's interesting. I'm just going to make a remark there, but the body that's composed of people that voted to do this decided not to have themselves actually be subject to it.
That's interesting, huh?
That usually sets off an alarm bell or two.
Yeah.
You know.
And go ahead and hit next. We talked about it. It was highly partisan. Only 2 Republicans voted yes that I could see. Rep. Conrad, Senator Finley. Only 1 Democrat voted no, Senator Meek. So it was a highly partisan, which is very disappointing because, as I said, this is not a partisan issue. This is about election integrity. We want a system that's easy to understand and that's easy to count. And this takes us in the opposite direction. It shouldn't be a partisan issue.
Were there groups that were actively lobbying against the passage of this bill in Salem?
I'm not aware of any active lobbying against this, which frankly is very typical.
Yeah. Well, that's how we got Measure 110, right?
Yeah. You know, we had millions of dollars come in from out of state to pass that bill or pass that ballot measure. And what did we have? A $100,000 or $200,000 effort against it?
Yeah, and we actually know from polling that was done by Riley Research. Mike Riley he's been on our show before, and he said the research actually showed that had people been told what was in Measure 110, it would have gone down in flames.
It would have gone down. They were deceived by the title, and I'm afraid that'll happen again with this.
Yeah.
So, and it really is going to take an education effort for Oregonians to understand what this is. And I think once they do understand it, they will be very much opposed to it. So that's our task. Yeah.
I asked about the lobbying because I know what happens when people only hear one side of an argument, and they're constantly plied with this, and people are like, well, doesn't this make sense? Or how about this? How about that? And then they buy one argument and they vote for something, and then everybody else gets to think it through later, and they're like, what were you thinking?
Yeah. All right. So let's go through how you vote with ranked choice voting. Basically, what you do is you rank every candidate. So let's say this is a primary race and there's 4 candidates. You're going to rank your candidates from first choice to 4th choice. And so this shows you an example of a correctly marked ballot. But it's not the only way to fill out the ballot. That's what you have to remember. So your first choice is your favorite candidate. In this case, candidate B is this voter's favorite choice. And then their least favorite choice is candidate D.
Yep.
So let's go to the next slide. So this one's pretty small, but you can see there's many different ways that you can correctly fill out the ballot. You could just mark your favorite and only your favorite. You could mark them as you could mark your favorite in every round, although that would be treated just like your favorite. You can mark a candidate in every one of the choices, or you could just mark a couple of them. But there's also ways where you can do it wrong. It's pretty hard to mark a ballot, our current ballot system, in an incorrect way. But there's a number of ways to mark it incorrectly with ranked choice voting.
Yeah, the only way I can think of in our current system is that if you mark more than one for an office, and then you essentially spoil it so no one can figure out who you voted for. That's about it.
Yeah. But the thing to remember, and it'll make more sense as we go along, I hope, is that there's all these different ways to mark a ranked choice voting ballot that are valid, but it will impact the outcomes in ways that are kind of unpredictable.
And maybe not what the person intended.
Exactly. May not be the way you intended.
Yeah.
And
Known as voter intent. It's supposed to be all important, right?
Right. So let's go ahead and, go ahead.
What are the wrong ways here?
So the wrong way is you can't mark more than one person as your first choice or second choice, for example. You can't skip more than two choices. So you can't mark your favorite as first and then your next favorite is fourth, for example. And you have to mark a first choice. So if you mark your ballot incorrectly, like in these options, your ballot will be considered exhausted. So it won't count in the tally. It's as if you didn't put anything at all on the sheet of paper.
Jeez, exhausted. That's a new term. Yeah.
That's a new term, but you'll get used to it here.
Yeah.
Talking about ranked choice voting.
If this becomes well, by the way, I am living under ranked choice voting. I'm in Oklahoma and in Portland, and they've even got a more sinister version we can talk about at the end for the city council races that is about the worst combination of systems you could have. But anyway, so should we go to the next slide?
Go ahead.
Let's see here. Did that go? There we go.
There we are. So how is the vote tallied? So in theory, what ranked choice voting wants to do is come up with a majority winner. That's what they say is one of their major selling points is you always get a majority winner. So how does that happen? So first off, we're ranking each of the candidates in order of our preference. And there's multiple ways, as you saw, that you could fill that out. The top choice on each ballot is counted. So whoever was marked in the first choice, they tally those up. And they look, does one candidate have a majority of the votes in that round? If the answer is yes, the election's done. We have a majority candidate. If there isn't a majority in that round, then the candidate that was in the last place is eliminated. The ballots for that candidate, the clerk looks at the second choice votes for those ballots, and those are applied to the remaining candidates. So if I chose the bottom candidate as an example, and in this case for this graphic, and he was the last choice, then the clerk would look at my second choice and apply those votes accordingly to either the first or second candidate, as it's shown here. Yep. Then those votes are tallied up, and then we look again. Does one candidate have a majority of votes in that round? The answer is yes, we're done. If it's no, then this process will continue. So you can imagine if you have, like we had in the Oregon Republican primary for governor, what do we have? 8 candidates, 9 candidates? You could have potentially, 8 rounds.
Oh, we had 16 actually.
Is it 16?
Yeah.
So we potentially have a lot of rounds to go through. And on each round, they're looking at your second choice, third choice, fourth choice, and so on. If you marked those choices, you don't have to, but if you did, that's how it would work.
And so and because it's what you said, instant runoff, it also technically eliminates like multiple rounds of voting over time. It's essentially you vote once.
Yeah, you wouldn't have a runoff election. That's where they get the term instant runoff. Yeah. The idea is you've made your choices, and in one election, this instant runoff process plays through, and they come up with a quote unquote majority winner.
So in the mayoral election, for instance, and what they were thinking about in the Portland metro area is that this essentially moves those races from where you used to have in the primary election time, you would have like everybody and his dog could run, and you get a whole bunch of candidates, and then you would end up with only if nobody got more than 50% plus one vote, you would take the top two candidates. They would go on to the general election, and then there would be a runoff in the general election. But what they advertise this as, at least two progressives, is that this is progressive because instead of having potentially a different electorate voting in the primary versus the general, you would get the maximum number of progressives showing up in the general election, which includes a lot of low information progressives. And then you would enfranchise more people by having more people vote at once instead of having this step one, step two. But of course, as we know, the problem is a lot of people can't figure out what the effect of their vote is in that instant runoff versus it's very clear what happened in the primary when you with the rules I just described, right? It was a majority based system under that already.
Yeah. Well, what has played out, it's played out in New York City, it's played out in Alaska. The turnouts are pretty low because people don't really trust and understand what the outcomes are anymore.
Yeah.
And the other problem is, amazingly, this process may result in your ballot not being counted at all because it was exhausted.
Yeah. So that's what comes next, I think.
That's what comes next. So this is I'll do my best to explain it. It's a complicated issue, but despite what the claims are for RCV, it will not deliver an absolute majority like you would think. Let's say there's 100. What would you say is a majority? There's 100 people that voted.
51.
One of the candidates got 51 votes. That's a majority of votes. That's not what they mean with ranked choice voting. So what it is it's when a candidate has a majority of votes in a given round, they're declared the winner. Exhausted ballots are not counted. If your ballot was exhausted before that round, you're not counted in the tally. So what do I mean by exhausted? A ballot is deemed exhausted in a round if it does not have one of the remaining candidates selected. So let's pretend I had Amy, Bob, and Joe were running, and I voted for Joe, and I just voted for Joe and nobody else. And he was the last place candidate. So my ballot for Joe my vote for Joe is eliminated because he got last in the first round. Now, when they go to the second round, I didn't select anybody. So my ballot is exhausted. It's not counted in the tally. And so when they do a majority count, they don't even consider my ballot. So we end up with this artificial majority.
Oh, I see. They shrink the
number of votes.
Yeah.
They shrink the denominator. So let's say there were 100 ballots cast in this election, and mine was exhausted. Now there's only 99 votes in the denominator, not 100.
Yeah.
So, but here's how this plays out in reality. So if a ballot is exhausted, it does not count towards the final tally. And in a recent New York City election, 15% of the ballots were exhausted before a winner was declared. That's about 140,000 voters. So this majority, when they say we got to a majority, it didn't count these 140,000 voters. as voters. It's
So
as
they
if
voted wrong.
it's as if they didn't fill anything out at all.
Yeah.
It's as if they submitted a blank ballot. So, and the troubling part with this is they've done studies to show this is disproportionately affects certain groups.
Yeah, minorities, right?
Minorities. I think 1 in 8 Alaska Natives were disenfranchised with this. 1 in every 8 Alaska Native voters.
That's because they had that for the first time in 2022 in Alaska, right?
And they saw what the results were. Was it 2020 or 2022?
I think it was 2022 because that was the year Lisa Murkowski that was on the ballot. She could not win. She's considered like a kind of a super rhino Republican at this point by even Alaskans. So she couldn't win the Republican primary. But they got this system in place in time so that when she was running for re-election, she could actually be the second choice candidate of a bunch of people and defeat the Republicans who, and then but that, I think that wasn't the worst part of it because everybody kind of thought that was coming. It was what happened in the congressional race.
What happened in the congressional race was unbelievable. They ended up having a Democrat win, even though the turnout was, there were 40,000 more Republicans that voted in that election than Democrats.
In a state that
has had a Republican representative for the past 50 years, 40 years in this district.
Yeah, so, Don Young was there forever.
Yeah,
basically.
So, and the reason is people were not clear on how to vote. And so you had Republicans split their first choice votes for 2 different Republican candidates, not mark a second choice. And then all the Democrats voted for one candidate. And that's what happened. So, and this was a jungle primary, a jungle type election, which we
it was 4 candidates, right?
Thing. But the point is that it's very sensitive to how you fill out your ballot, and we can see it in New York. We've seen it in other jurisdictions where a lot of ballots are simply exhausted. They're not counted toward the final tally. So the claim that you have a majority is really a false claim.
Well, and I think that there's other iterations of this that sometimes are even worse, like the jungle primary of 4. Sarah Palin was one of the candidates.
Yeah.
Known. If this is her versus a Democrat in a general election, this is a runaway. Of course, I just read how everybody's really upset that the member of Congress that came out of that election, the Democrat, doesn't seem to be representing voters from Alaska. No. Gee, I wonder how that happened. And you know what? This is the Democrat dream for red states. And it's the Democrat dream for red districts. And it's the Democrat dream. And I know I'm getting really partisan about this, but it's the dream that they can actually just extinguish all opposition by Republicans in places that Republicans tend to win even.
But remember, the thing is, it can be manipulated by whoever is more organized and understands the system better and can communicate that to their base.
Even if voters don't understand.
Even if voters don't. And we got to remember the Washington, D.C. Democrats are very strongly opposed to this.
Yeah.
And I believe it's because they feel it disenfranchises large groups of their voters. They just don't understand it. They're not going to fill it out correctly, and or they won't vote at all.
Yeah.
And we've seen voter turnout. My understanding is in Alaska, voter turnout has dropped.
Which apparently is fine with Dan Rayfield, but anyway.
Well, I talked briefly with him, and he's really an advocate. And when I spoke to him, I had not done any real research on it, but I have kind of a skeptical take on certain things, and this just wasn't making sense to me how this would be better. for us.
Yeah,
But he's very much an advocate for it.
Yeah, and we've seen this. There's been other movements across the country, national
Mhm.
popular vote to essentially neutralize the electoral college, which actually ironically hurts small states like Oregon.
Yeah.
There's a whole variety. Vote by mail actually at one time was one of these fringe things that they experimented on in certain places, and then at 2020 it spread about as faster than COVID did actually,
Right.
across the country. And so this is not new, but that the phenomena that they experiment on this, but they do it with things that people don't fully understand the impact of. So shall we go to the next slide there?
Go ahead. Yeah. Here's another, in my opinion, a very serious flaw with ranked choice voting. And it's because of these multiple rounds. So if you have a statewide election for governor, for example, what do we do today? Each county tallies up the votes for candidate A, candidate B, candidate C, sends those tallies to the state. The state assembles all the votes from 36 counties. We know our winner. Well, if we can't do that with ranked choice voting, because we have to tally it up one round at a time. So each county tallies up their first choice votes, submits that to the state. The state then calculates whether we have a majority or not. And then we got to go through this cumbersome process to go through round two. And what Maine does, for example, is if there is an election that goes beyond the first round, the state takes over the voting. So this transfers the voting on the ballot tabulation to the Secretary of State. And you can see it in this ballot measure. If you read the ballot measure, where it modifies existing law, where it used to say the county shall do this, the county or the Secretary of State now shall do this. So they know we're transferring power control over from taking it out of the counties and moving it to the state. I do not like that at all.
Well, and that's a fundamental power shift, because didn't we learn, somebody mentioned that the county clerks actually had originally come out against this?
There's a number of county clerks that are adamantly opposed to this, for a number of reasons. This is one reason. It really complicates counting. In fact, it makes it almost impossible to hand count.
Yeah.
It complicates how you would audit something like this. How do you do a spot check? Right now, you can, like in Marion County, they organize by precinct. So it's very small batches of ballots, and they can go back and they can look at those ballots and hand count them and verify that the scanner counted the same as their hand count. It becomes much more difficult, especially when you have 8 or 10 or more candidates in a primary, of how are you going to do this spot check and validate this, because it almost has to be done at a statewide level, because everything's consolidating. You can't just tally results at a county by county level anymore.
So those people that we elect in many of our counties, there's a few where they're just appointed or they're employees of the county commission. But in the counties where we elect a county clerk, this county clerk in the races that we're talking about that will be covered by this, and I have full confidence that if they do it with those races, they'll eventually do it with all of them if they like the result.
Mm-hmm.
But those county clerks will have to say after the first round, out of my hands, I'm not in charge anymore.
Yeah.
I can't do anything. I can't assure you that the voting results can be audited accurately in my county.
And you can see what Maine does. The ballots or the memory devices containing the raw data are handed to the Secretary of State. And then they finish the voting. They finish the counting.
Yeah. And that comes down to one person, one elected official, essentially, instead of this decentralized system of validation geographically, which, by the way, that's something that we should remember. Vote by mail kind of eliminated something as a useful check, especially if you're trying to make sure that people really exist who are voting, is precincts. Vote by mail essentially made precincts just arbitrary definitions. You can't audit a precinct very effectively anymore. And this is going to not only, so this will pick up where vote by mail left off after taking away that highly localized knowledge of who was actually voting,
right,
and moved it to vote by mails at the county level. Now this is going to take for a huge swath of stuff and just push it all the way to the state level and just render it. And by the way, and I think you're going to cover this, but as you said, you can't hand count it. So what does that mean?
Oh, I know. It means you're almost required now to use a computer. But the computer systems we have won't work with ranked choice voting. So they would have to be updated.
So that leads us right to this slide.
Yeah. So this is just some of the problems with ranked choice voting. We've talked about it already. It's complicated for voters. New York has spent millions of dollars to educate voters on how to use it. My understanding is the Portland metro area has plans to spend about $650,000 on an education campaign to teach people how to use ranked choice voting for the system they already have. There's more ways to incorrectly fill out a ballot. That's why the part of the reason that ballots are exhausted is because they were filled out incorrectly. And I've read studies that show this, that what's odd is one of the claims is they say this will increase voter participation. One thing that the proponents are worried about is there's a lot of people that just don't fill out, they won't mark anything on a ballot.
Yeah.
But then they compared it, but when we do ranked choice voting, they're more likely to fill the ballot out. Their data, so I read the study. The data does say, yes, they're more likely to fill it out, but guess what? They're more likely to fill it out wrong. So the reject rate was greater. They don't mention that part. The reject rate was greater. All of this, how in the world, if you create something that's harder to vote and harder to count, that's not going to increase confidence in our elections. And I don't care if you think our elections today are perfectly sound or they're completely flawed or something in the middle. The truth is we have people who are not confident in the integrity of our elections. This is doing nothing to add confidence. In fact, it's going to reduce confidence in our elections.
And adding complexity doesn't help voters that struggle with the current system.
Right.
It just adds complexity and makes it harder for them. So these are all the problems with it, right?
Yeah. This is a partial list of problems.
Right. And so it essentially makes us completely dependent on machines, which people have questions about the machines.
Yeah. I wrote software for a living. I program computers and to make machines do things. And I'm not a fan of having our election systems run by a computer. In Oregon, one thing we have going for us, we do use paper ballots. I like paper ballots.
Yeah.
We use computers in a limited capacity to validate signatures and to do digital scanning of those ballots. And every county does it a little bit different. In some other parts of the country, they don't even use paper ballots. They're computerized all the way. That makes me nervous because, like I said, I've written code before.
Yeah, you know what it is you're speaking of. I've done coding too, and I've done it with databases.
Yeah.
The issue is that one line of code can actually, even when it wasn't intended, when it's just a bug or an error, can actually mess things up.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, you can have people intentionally do it. You can have hackers do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the more automation you do, the more you're dependent on algorithms to make all these decisions correctly for you, which people don't necessarily have full trust in. And then we constantly hear that if you question an algorithm, if you question the computer systems, if you question any part of the process, you are undermining democracy. And if you say, well, we need to audit this, it's like you're spreading misinformation. I'm not getting my confidence reinforced when that's the response, that being auditing something is a problem.
Right.
Yet we want to spend millions of dollars adding a system that people aren't going to understand, and it's going to disenfranchise voters to solve a problem that, and this is my number one question, what problem is this system solving that's so pressing that nobody, that we can't go on without it?
No, this isn't solving any problem. It's creating more problems. So this makes it, in short, it makes it harder to vote, makes it harder to count, and absolutely it makes it harder to trust.
Yes.
And I think on the next slide, I get into a few other things. Yeah. So these are some of the claims that are made by the proponents of ranked choice voting. So one claim is that RCV always results in a majority winner. That is false. We've had elections where at the end of the tally, it didn't have a majority. Plus, I've already talked about it's not really a majority. It's a manufactured one anyway, because exhausted ballots aren't even counted in the tally.
Yeah.
So that's really a false claim. And unfortunately, it's in the ballot title. We'll get a majority, and it's absolutely false.
Yeah.
You will not get a majority every time. They claim that RCV reduces negative campaigning and mitigates impact of money in politics. There's very weak. That's a wimpy, weak case they make for that. I think it just changes how the money's going to be spent. They claim it increases voter turnout. There is no evidence for that, but there is evidence that shows it decreases turnout.
Yeah.
Is probably a good recent case in point. They claim it encourages third-party candidates. There's evidence that shows it may actually hurt third-party candidates.
Yeah, they disappear. They end up becoming the exhausted candidates, right?
Right. And there's some that show, and I've included a video of this, that they claim it eliminates the spoiler effect. You know what the spoiler effect is. And that is one of the challenges with our current plurality system. You got to pick one. So are you wasting your vote by picking this third-party candidate? Will it open the door for the candidate you don't like to get elected? I know when I sit down and I see multiple candidates, I think about that. But as a voter, I make a decision. I've got three choices. I research it, I investigate, and I'll make my pick. And we'll tally the outcome. It's pretty obvious. But the claim that ranked choice voting eliminates that is not true. It may eliminate it in some cases, but not in all cases. And what this one study shows is putting your favorite first only works if your candidate is very strong or has no chance at all. Otherwise, your vote may indeed work as a spoiler effect the same way it does in the plurality system.
And it could do it for the second highest ranked candidate.
Yeah.
Potentially, right? Which people would be like, well, wait a second, they got the second most votes. So how did that happen, right?
So if we haven't eliminated the spoiler effect, we haven't increased third-party candidates, we haven't increased voter turnout, and we're just manufacturing a majority vote, why in the world are we doing this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's on top of the complexity.
Yeah.
Which I think if people want to trust the system, and that's important, They aren't increasing trust, which is just seems like it's creating a new problem.
And okay, this one's a little geeky, but it, to me, this is really important, and this has to do with the outcomes. One rule that I think any election system should follow, it's intuitive. It's called the monotonicity rule. That's a fancy word for a simple concept. Voting a candidate higher should never cause the candidate to lose, nor should voting a candidate lower ever cause that candidate to win. In other words, voting your choice should only help the candidate. Well, believe it or not, ranked choice voting fails this test. The monotonicity rule isn't something I just made up. There's all these different election systems they have, and they score them based on certain criteria. This, to me, is a real basic, essential one that any election system we have in America should pass, and this one doesn't do it. So I gave an example here. So let's say you have three candidates, Ann, Bob, and Corey, and they're running for Congress. There's 100 ballots cast. So in this case, no candidate has a majority of the vote. So the last place finisher, Corey, is eliminated. Corey's votes go to Ann, who wins the second round with 65 of the 100 votes. So this is obviously a simplified version. It shows all Corey voters chose Ann as their second choice.
Right.
So let's go through a hypothetical scenario here. Let's say Ann knows that kind of what the outcome of this is going to be. She knows Bob is her next closest opponent. So she goes into Bob territory and she recruits voters hard. She sells them that she's the best choice. She converts Bob voters over to Ann voters to vote for Ann first. So she's done that. Let's play this scenario out again.
Next slide.
Next slide. So now Ann approached this election totally differently, say, this hypothetical. She went and recruited Bob voters. So she took Bob voters down from what they were down to 25, and she moved her votes up to 49. Well, what happened? What happened is Corey is now the second place finisher. So Bob is disqualified. And Bob's second preference, those voters that voted for Bob, they take their second preference. Those go to Corey. Now Corey wins the election because now Corey has 51 votes. So what happened in this scenario is Ann got more votes in this hypothetical election and lost. Ann was punished for going out and convincing Bob voters to vote for her instead.
She was punished for persuading second ranked opponent that their supporters should support her.
Right. And those voters were punished for putting Ann first.
That's the problem, is it's not intuitive.
No election should look like this. But the thing is, this isn't just hypothetical. If you go to the next slide, this has played out in a couple areas, and this example is from Burlington, Vermont. So there was a three-way race. Bob Kiss won the election, but he could have lost if more right voters had ranked Kiss first, causing Montrol to come in second place. Montrol would have gained enough votes from right in the second round to defeat Kiss. So guess what Burlington, Vermont did? They repealed ranked choice voting.
And that's a pretty liberal place.
That's a pretty liberal place. Yeah, this is bipartisan repeal. Remember, I said 85 jurisdictions that have tried ranked choice voting have repealed ranked choice voting. And it's because of outcomes like this that don't make sense. The outcome doesn't make sense. The voters feel disenfranchised. They're not sure how to fill out their ballot because there's several different ways they can fill it out and still be quote unquote correct. But the way they fill it out could affect the outcome. So, there's so many issues with this. But to me, this was a very compelling, probably the most compelling reason not to use ranked choice voting.
And the fact that it's so complicated to even explain at times what's so wrong with this
No.
should actually make it a good reason not to do it, because
Yeah.
if something's wrong with the system, it also should be easier to understand it. The fact that somebody can just, befuddle you with BS in a debate over whether or not this is right or wrong,
Right.
shouldn't happen. You shouldn't have people saying, I don't get it, so I'm not voting.
Well, and that's what happened. My understanding is with Alaska, after the first ranked choice voting election, and looking at the outcomes that they couldn't explain, they didn't understand, they just didn't show up the next time.
Yeah.
They had, I think, the lowest turnout in history.
Wow.
So this is just a sampling of some of the locations. These are not conservative hotbeds.
No.
So this is not a partisan issue. I want to make sure everybody understands that this is not a partisan issue. Go ahead to the next slide. MIT did this, looked at the outcomes and spoke to voters in Maine, and it's very interesting. So they're proving that RCV produced significantly lower levels of voter confidence, voter satisfaction, and ease of use. It also increased the perception that the voting process was slanted against the respondent's party, whatever party it was. They got the results, whether they were talking to a Republican or a Democrat.
Huh.
It also increased the amount of time it took to vote, because I think they vote in booths here. So, and this is from MIT. So I've hit on a number of issues. I would encourage people to go and research this themselves. If you go to the next slide, that I've included, when you ask somebody, where do you go to evidence that supports ranked choice voting, everybody points to one place, fairvote.org. The two websites that I've highlighted that I found useful, stoprcv.com and rankedchoiceedu.org. Those are great resources that are critical of RCV and provide a lot of evidence. And through this slide, Kevin, and you can share it with anybody, I've included links to the sources that I use for this information.
So in Oregon, knowing that this is going to show up on the ballot, and there are places like in Eugene where they're working on something called star voting, which is kind of another version of this.
Yes.
You go around Eugene and there's just star voting signs all over the place. And nobody knows what it is. So, and at the statewide level, no one's actually had the opportunity to see what a debacle it is in most of Oregon. And they're going to be voting this way in November in Portland and Multnomah County.
Yeah.
Which means that they won't have time to vote against it and say, that was a bad idea based on what they saw in Portland or Multnomah County. So we've got an issue, right? No organized opposition to get the word out. There's just you and the PowerPoint and these groups. What can people do to, kind of combat this? Because that people are going to hear from the well-financed. I thought I heard that George Soros was one of the funders of Fair Vote and that whole effort, but
I think that's the case. I know they will be pumping money into Oregon. They're pumping money into some other states as well. I think, what I'm looking for is a group to organize, to put a website together, to raise funds, and to educate and get people aware of this. The Ranked Choice Education Association has some great resources that they're more than willing to share with us. They will produce material and videos that are Oregon specific if we want them to do that. Philip is the gentleman's name that heads up Ranked Choice Education Association. He's a great resource. He's also going to be coming down. I won't get the date correctly, but it's sometime in May. He's coming to Oregon to talk about ranked choice voting, the mess it's made up in Alaska, and his effort to get it on the ballot to repeal in November 2024. So, and there's a huge momentum in Alaska to repeal ranked choice voting.
I'll bet.
Yeah. But I think we need to organize. We're not going to have anybody come and bail us out with money. It's not going to happen. It's going to be homegrown. The defense and the opposition to ranked choice voting is going to be homegrown.
And we shouldn't concede that this is somehow just a Republican issue. As you said, people from every party and every candidate seem to feel that this is biased against their own candidate. It's liberal strongholds that have repealed it. It's just a bad idea.
California Governor Gavin Newsom has spoke out against ranked choice voting. Former California Governor Brown has spoken out against ranked choice voting. The Oakland NAACP has spoken out against it. The Washington, D.C., District of D.C. Democrats are strongly opposed to it. We need, as we're thinking of how we're going to communicate this to Oregonians, we need to pull those resources in and make sure people hear that. Again, this isn't a Republican issue versus Democrats. This is maintaining our democracy in Oregon.
Yeah.
Maintaining the integrity of our elections in Oregon. Everybody should rally around that, whether you're a Democrat, Independent, or Republican.
Well, it's not just maintaining it; it's preventing it from being destroyed in many many. And it was hanging by a thread with far too many people already. Now, what's interesting, I just came up with this. I've been thinking ever since Saturday. What is a nice, simple message? And it's whatever this measure is called on the ballot. It's the measure 110 of voting.
Yeah, it is the measure 110 of voting. Yeah, I like that.
It might be that easy.
I mean, it's funded by out-of-state folks. It is the measure 110 of voting. And I've been thinking, we need to protect our democracy. We need to stop ranked choice voting.
And it creates a problem instead of solving one that people say needs to be solved. Even it's actually arguably worse than measure 110 because even measure 110 pretended to solve a problem. This thing isn't even doing that.
No, it's not. It's just creating a whole bunch of other problems. Yeah.
Well, this has been very enlightening. Let me see if I can get us back onto the same screen here. There we go.
Right.
And I think that I want to thank you for taking the time to do this because you're a busy guy. You're state rep. That's more than a full-time job much of the year. And then on top of that, you're taking on this cause and helping educate folks, and you do it so well. And I'm so pleased and grateful that you were able to come on today and explain this, because if someone doesn't explain it, we're just going to end up with more problems than we know what to do.
Yeah.
We've already got plenty.
Kevin, I would love to get you connected with Philip from Ranked Choice Education Association and his efforts in Alaska. And he's great. He's done a really deep dive on this, and he could really add, I'm sure, a lot to what I've said.
I got to hear from Sarah Palin back at the platform convention, and she said some choice words.
She had choice words, I bet. Yeah, she did.
Yeah, and I feel like we've got so many things that are clearly in need of being addressed. Let's just stop adding to our list of problems. It's I
really hope that Oregonians, when they look at something like this, they look at it with a skeptical eye. They don't just, boy, reading a ballot title and changing your entire election system based on 20 words you read.
Yeah.
I just hope to God that people are more skeptical and critical than that and actually dive into what this is.
Well, we have a chance to do it, and you helped us get started along that process. So thank you so much.
Happy to help, Kevin.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. We look forward to having you on again. I know there's going to be another topic. We'll probably talk energy. What do you think? We might talk energy because I'm going to get the opportunity possibly to see what you've talked about often about the small advanced nuclear at NuScale. And I'm excited to learn more because I like thinking that there's just things that we could actually do to solve the problems rather than cause new ones. We could actually really do something that would change everything for the better.
No, it'd be great to do this after your tour.
I think this might just be a good time. Yes.
And I would love to go on that tour with you, but I can't, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I'm appreciative that as busy as you were able to come on and do this today. And like I said, we look forward to having you on to the next time.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone for watching here today. Please share the show with everyone you can, and we'll make a link to this information available when the show streams live so that you can share it with everyone you can, and we can spread the word. Thanks again for watching, and we'll be back with another episode of The Captive Audience tomorrow. Have a great evening, everyone.